In this set of tutorials, we're going to learn how to program using a method called object-oriented programming. We will do this using Kodu Game Lab, which is a free download from Microsoft. This allows us to create 3D interactive games using an object-oriented programming method. There are several different ways of programming. We call these different programming paradigms. A paradigm is simply a system or approach to programming. The earliest types of programming were imperative programming. This is where you give the computer a long list of instructions. This is similar to if we wanted to make a meal with a starter, a main course and a dessert. We would give one long list of instructions for how to create the meal. The problem with this is that because the instruction list is long, it can be hard to follow. And also, if we wanted to change the main course or the dessert, our long list will be difficult to reuse. To get around this, a new way of programming was introduced called procedural programming. In procedural programming, you make lots of little mini recipes called procedures or functions, and then you use these as required. So to make our meal, we would select a starter, we would select a main, we would select a dessert from pre-made recipes. And obviously this is better. However, it is now more difficult to debug. If something goes wrong, then we're not sure exactly where the problem is. And it's also still not as easy to reuse as it could be. Object-oriented programming is a much better way to program. In this method, we make a set of objects that contain information about what they are and also how they operate. Then we create programs which use these objects to work together to make our meal or our intended result. This is equivalent to training some chefs, putting some ingredients in a kitchen, and then allowing them to get on with the job. The chefs know how to do their own tasks, and the ingredients obviously have the characteristics that are required. This is a much better way to program because it's much easier to sort out where the problems are, and it's also very easy to reuse the parts that have been made. If a chef is getting things wrong, we replace him with another chef. If an ingredient doesn't work, we remove it and put a different ingredient in. This makes for a very easy to reuse system. The features of object-oriented programming are, as you see here, objects and classes, attributes and methods, encapsulation and data hiding, message passing, inheritance and polymorphism. We will learn more about these by using the Kodu game system. First, we will have a look at objects and classes. In the real world, we have objects such as this VW Beetle. We use the process of abstraction to make a simplified model of a real-world object. This becomes a blueprint called a class. So a class is a description of a real-world object without all of the individual details. Here our blueprint shows us what our model looks like, some of its attributes or properties, and also the class would contain information about what the model can do. The methods would include things like driving, accelerating, braking, and so on. From here, we can create an object. An object is an instance of the class that is built in RAM so that it can be used by the program. Here we see a VW Beetle that has been created in Grand Theft Auto 5, and using the properties it has been made to look like the famous Herbie VW Beetle. This process, using an abstract model to create a class, and then creating objects is an important concept in object-oriented programming. The objects is the object-oriented part of the whole system. So we start with a real-world object, for example, a Mars rover. We create a class which is a blueprint of how we want this to look inside the computer. This would include what it looks like, details of how it operates, and also all of the actions and things that it can do. These would be the methods. From this, we can then create versions of the real-world object in the game as instances. In Kodu, there is a Mars rover which can be used on your levels. So one more example, abstract model, creating a class and then used as an object. Real-world object, we could have a piece of rock. A blueprint of this that should be used for a class would give us all of the properties of this type of rock. So for this feldspar rock, we know about the color, we know about the hardness, we know about the density, and from that we can then generate an in-game instance that can be used in RAM and run as part of our level. Here we have used a Kodu igneous rock in the level. We will now look at how Kodu uses classes to generate objects. Classes are built into Kodu. In Kodu, when we create an object, we create it from a blueprint of various different types of objects. A rock, a Kodu, a Mars rover, an apple, and so on. In some systems, you can define your own classes. In Kodu, you can only work with those that are built in. This is a limitation of Kodu, but it will allow us to create some interesting games using object-oriented programming techniques. When you put an object into the game level, it will then be generated as a playable object. So it is instantiated in RAM, and there is a meter at the side of the screen that will tell you if you have run out of RAM. So we can see here, with lots of Kodu objects on the screen, that the meter is almost full and has turned red. These objects, when the game is run, will use their methods to interact with the environment and create the actual gameplay. It's now time to load up Kodu and start learning how to use object-oriented programming techniques. With Kodu loaded, you will have a main menu, and we can resume previous games, load a world that's been made, various other options. We want to start with a new world to learn how to use Kodu. So click on New World, and it will generate a square patch of terrain with no objects on. By right-clicking with the mouse, you can move the terrain forward, backwards, left and right. By right-clicking on the terrain, you can twist and turn. For the moment, we will leave the terrain in place. That was done with the hand icon chosen. That allows us to move the world around. And we will instead use the object tool, which is a little Kodu with a star. If I click on the main part of the world now, a circular menu pops up, and this allows me to choose different objects. Each of these is a class, or, in this case, a group of classes. When you're in a menu, you can press Escape to go back to the previous menu, and Escape to leave entirely. Clicking again returns to the menu. I'm going to start off with a simple Kodu object. And we can see that this object has been placed in the world. I can drag to place my Kodu anywhere I like, and even outside of the terrain. These are properties of the object. The position, the coordinates are part of the properties, as is the color. If I use the arrow keys, I can change to red, orange, yellow, green on the Kodu that has been placed in the world. So let's have a look at some of these attributes then. You can change the color, as we said, by pointing at an object and using the arrow keys to cycle through the colors. We can also right-click on an object and change to choose the size, or the rotation, or the height. For example, here we can see that the size has been changed to make a much larger Kodu. Or we can right-click and choose Change Settings, and this will pop up a list, a scrollable list of different properties. For example, here, with Show Hit Points switched on, we see a health bar attached to the Kodu. So let's have a look at some of those in practice. I right-click and choose Rotate. And if I then use the arrow key and take this down to 180, then Kodu will be pointing directly towards me. And I can then close with the cross here. I can choose Change Height and make Kodu closer to the ground. And if I press Escape, I leave that menu. I can change size and make Kodu larger. And again, Escape will let me leave the menu. If I right-click and choose Change Settings, then I can use my arrow keys to go through various different options. Here is Show Hit Points. When it is a green power button, it will be switched on. And there are many different properties that can be changed for Kodu. Escape, take me back, and see now that Kodu has a health bar. To actually see the object created in the game, we press the play button, and Kodu has gone into his idle method, and pressing Escape will take us back to the main menus and the menu bar along the bottom.